Hey,
Hey guys, it's Brandy,
Michelle.
and so today we wanted to have kind of a current events conversation with you guys, and hence the word conversation, because we really think that that's the whole basis of the conversation. I think needs to get started, and why not start within ourselves, small communities, start small conversations that can lead to larger conversation about today's issues, and especially, happening.
Jump into it.
Okay.
NFL protests
Right.
of the protests during the national anthem. So it matters. But Colin, since we're on a first name basis now because he's really doing a lot, he basically took the time to protest during the national anthem last year. A lot of people argue now that that's the reason.
Specifically, he took a knee.
Right, took a knee,
knelt down.
during the national anthem in an effort to raise awareness and attention to racial inequality, and specifically police misconduct that is disproportionately focused on people of color. Being that Colin is a person of color, and not just that, but just a person who's concerned about how our country is operating in 2017, he felt it necessary to use his platform to speak out against these injustices. People argue that for that reason, he is now not within the NFL. He does not have a position on any team. So we have now these series of tweets from 45 on Saturday, where basically, or actually, this was actually at his rally, where he was basically denouncing and kind of directing NFL owners to suspend and fire players who demonstrated against police brutality in the form of taking a knee during the national anthem. Right. So what we have is a direct response to those threats. There are protests from several players, several teams collectively working together to demonstrate, either by taking a knee, locking hands, whatever the case is, to show that they are unified and to really solidify their position on these matters, which I think is important. So we have a lot of debate, a lot of issues. We have the Trump tweets about how this is improper and owners need to fire these players, etc., etc. A lot of discussion on it, right? I'm not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about if kneeling is the right form of protest, if kneeling is disrespectful to the flag, if it's disrespectful to our country, to our service members, etc. That can be debated in another time. What I think that these protests that are occurring now, what they really are focused on, what we should be drawing attention to, is not that the fact that they're kneeling and is it right, is it wrong. They are doing this to draw attention to police brutality, police misconduct that is consistently operating within the United States. What does that mean, right? Okay, well, discrimination is something that's real, and it doesn't operate just in a, I'm going to do this because you're black type of way. Police, as research shows, these are facts. These are not anecdotal stories. How our country operates is that people of color are not treated in the same way as others by police officers and by police departments, or they do not experience the same policing strategies as other people in the United States. So what does that mean? That people of color are more likely to be stopped, more likely to be questioned by the police. When you're questioned, you're potentially a suspect. So that means you're more likely to encounter situations where you may have some use of force used against you, which could be from just as simply as a police officer yelling at you to, halt and do this or do that, or to, them kind of placing you in cuffs or arresting you, or in, some cases where they actually potentially use excessive force, where they're, roughing you up. And why this is important is because, 45 actually was speaking about police brutality in about July in the context of basically that it was a positive thing, that police needed to do it more.
Rough people up more.
Rough people up, when they were suspected of a crime and not convicted. And even if people are convicted of a crime, we operate in a democracy. We're the United States, right? We're the best country ever. So we should act like it. We should not, our conversations need to be focused on what can we do and what is the president's role in fostering equality within this country, and specifically equality with how policing is done towards people of color and towards communities of color, because there are consistent disparities. There are more aggressive policing strategies being used, more use of higher levels of use of force, higher levels of disrespect. People of color in general are more likely to be stopped, more likely to be arrested. At every point in the criminal justice system, they're more likely to be convicted. All of these things, even when there are the similar circumstances and the same factors at play for someone of a different race. So that means that the justice system is not acting indiscriminately. And that's the total ideal of why it was created. We want a system that's going to fairly sanction and respond to criminal acts, and it's not doing that. So what we need to be talking about is that how can the country improve? What are the disparities, and why is this okay? Why is this still operating? Right. And until it does, it's going to affect people who are on the street. It's going to affect multi-million-dollar athletes, because when they leave from the field, they are still potentially they could potentially encounter police that only see them as a threat. And so that means that their money, they don't see their wealth in that. So their children, when they encounter their families, their experiences, they are all subject to experience inequality, and it's not right. And so we should do something about that. And so that's what these protests are about. That's what we need to be thinking about. That these are where the conversations need to lie, not debates about these actions that they're doing, but the actions of our country, the action and how we have these ideals that are represented in these patriotic movements and things like that, but we're not upholding them. We're not being fair. We're not doing what we need to do. Right. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
No. Yeah, you're making valid points. I mean, that's the whole point, is redirecting this energy to, better the situation and hopefully change the situation, and as these people are getting interviewed about, why, we know why, but let it be a little bit more profound. Say, well, I'm doing this because I want someone to make a difference. I want a movement to happen to where this doesn't have to keep happening to a specific race of people, people of color, not a specific race of people, but people of color in general, because it's not just happening to Black people, unfortunately.
And I hope I hope that players, as this continues and they're being questioned about this, they point to the things that are going on and redirect the conversation as to, listen, how many times have we heard of police-involved shootings where the facts were fuzzy, where somehow, for some reason, people of color are disproportionately more likely to experience these types of interactions that we see play out on our cell phone cameras? How many instances are we supposed to see? There must be. Why is there this trend? Why is it that every time there's always something where people in marginalized communities, whether they're dealing with issues of mental impairment, whether it's the color of their skin, whether it's their religion, whether it's their neighborhood context, why are they encountering situations where police act in a way that puts them in danger, that puts the citizens in danger? That's not right. How many cases are we going to have where we see the footage? We see the footage of police misconduct, okay, whether it's excessive force, whether it's disrespect, whether it's, blatant, roughing up of someone, whatever the case is, we see it. How many of those cases are then taken by prosecutors and actually, put through the system where they're indicted and they're going to trial? How many can we name? Out of the ones that have been indicted and have been arrested, how many of them have been taken to trial? How many of them have actually not, pled out or done a settlement or the case fell apart? Then for the ones that actually went to trial, how many have been convicted of a crime? How many officers who have engaged in police brutality to some degree have been sanctioned by the criminal justice system that's supposed to uphold laws, protected citizens? When it's not doing that, that also shows a trend that not only these actions are occurring, but there's no accountability for them. They can happen unwillingly, and it doesn't matter, because when they happen, they're still not going to be penalized for them. So what's the problem? That empowers people to continue to, use the law in ways that it shouldn't be used. And that's what we need to be figuring out. How do we change that? How do we increase the accountability? And how do we make sure that the justice system isn't operating in these disparate ways? So, let us know kind of what you think with these various situations that we're seeing, these injustices, and what can we do about it?
Because remember, this is just the beginning of, we're still in playoffs,
No, the season just started.
So the season just started. So basically, this is going to be happening, pretty much consistently. And, I'm curious to see what happens. You know what I mean?
We need to be having the conversation, or the conversation that Trump needs to be having is, okay, what are the issues that these players are trying to bring to the forefront? And what policy recommendations can I begin to foster to change this? For example, when we talk about police brutality, right? We usually just think of police roughing up people and beating them down or shooting them and killing them. But there's police brutality in all forms, especially when we talk about, I'm sure, instances that we have experienced day to day or weekend to weekend, where, you get in a situation, you get pulled over, and you're being talked to rudely, you're being questioned about where you're going, what you're doing, you're asked to step out of the car, or you don't know if this is a request or if you have to. All of these different things create an atmosphere in this interaction where we're fearful, perhaps the officer is fearful, but they're engaging in this type of communication with us that's predominantly negative. I mean, how many of us encounter police officers, if you question anything that they're saying or doing, like, if you're out thinking about, you're out on, during the summer, there have been a lot of street events, if it gets too crowded and they're like, step aside, and you're like, well, what, I can't step right here? Step aside, I said. You're like, oh my God, like, what's the problem? Now, these people are in a position of authority, but are they supposed to exercise their authority in that way?
Of course not.
In a negative way?
Not. Of course not.
And if they're more likely to speak to me and you like that than they would, let's say, a soccer mom, or a teenager, or whatever, if there are differences between how they act with different demographics or different areas, that's wrong. That's number one, the law shouldn't be operating in that way. So what Trump can do for number one is speak out against it. Say, hey, police, I know we care about our public safety. I know we care about our streets, but we have to treat these people with respect as we're going about. So that way, people are like, what? I know they have my best interests at heart.
But we know that that's not something that Trump
of course, right. I know.
Respect? What do you mean? I don't treat anybody with respect. So,
but
to
that's
ask him
one.
to do something that's outside his character is never going to happen. But there's power in the people. There's power in our, we don't realize how fucking powerful we are because we are the people. You know what I'm saying? Like, we do make this stuff happen. Look how powerful. Let's think about this for 1 second. Those people that are kneeling, say they just decided not to play. Yeah, they'd all be forfeiting their money and their, all that they have.
Contracts,
but who would hurt more?
Right.
Who
Advertisers,
the
their
NFL
owners,
would crumble.
NFL.
Come on.
People who are at bars waiting for the game, they'll be very, very upset.
Of course.
And if we're that upset about that issue, about what they're doing or not playing, we're so upset about that. if we want them to just play the game, then maybe we should say, okay, well, what do they want? What do they want? Okay, all right, let's begin at police brutality. Let's begin at police misconduct. Okay, let's create an initiative, Trump. Right. Why don't you say, appease us? Okay, I'm going to create a coalition, and we're going to think about new policing strategies and try to re-foster the culture within policing. Right. But his trend of behavior, as we know, is consistently against people. It's against citizens, and it's for law and order, as he says. So how likely is it that he's actually going to stand up for that and call it out? But that's what it's going to take. So until it does, then the players are going to continue to express their views,
because that's the least that they could.
Exactly.
It's not the least technically, but that is. If I'm in this just to play the game, you know what I mean? Like, the least I can do in solidarity to, me as a person who this is overall affecting, one way or another, I'm going to kneel. And even, we were talking about this earlier, the pure kneeling in itself is an act of showing, of humbleness. Yes. It's an act of, not even,
it's kind of a mourning act.
Yeah.
So when we think about, the flag, when it goes at half staff, when someone dies and you're mourning someone, this kneeling...
Or a national tragedy,
Right, a national tragedy. Right. Kneeling kind of signifies. I've seen some of these pictures with the players, their heads are so down and they're so, you can see the seriousness and the somberness in their faces, where it seems like, I cannot fully stand at attention and celebrate this, call about my country's ideals when my country isn't operating in that way. Right. It's not being a country for all. It's not about freedom. Right. Why? Because not everybody is free to, let's say, curse out an officer when they're upset, when they had a bad day, right? You get pulled over, you're like, this stupidness, I'm so tired of you. Mm-hmm. How likely is it that my situation is going to escalate to where I'm taken out of my car, my stuff is ran, I may be placed on the sidewalk, in contrast to someone else's experience? Mm-hmm. That shouldn't be different. If it is different, the only reason why it should be different is because I'm posing a threat, an actual threat, let's be clear. If I'm posing a threat, if I have done something that warrants it. Any other extra legal factors are not within this, equation, or shouldn't be. Right. So, that's what we need to be talking about as to why are these things that we have just come to understand as commonplace.
What do we need to do to change it?
Yeah, right. Commonplace ideas of, I just know how the police are. That's not okay. Mm-hmm. That's not okay. When this entity, this institution is supposed to represent the ideals of morality. They should be operating in the best way possible. Mm-hmm. When we talk about teachers, they represent a position of authority to teach young minds and, lead children, etc., etc. We expect for them to behave in a certain way. They can't be beating up kids, slapping them down, cursing them out because they're frustrating, because they're annoying, because they're bad, because they're not listening, because they're not learning. All of these are things that are part of their job. That's for a teacher. So if we're talking about a policing institution, our standards needs to be way higher. And these protests are calling attention to the fact that they're not. They're not, and that's not how we're operating. So until it does, until there's actually, if there's now an awareness, but there's not even a understanding that this is needed. We're talking about the kneeling. We're talking about how this is disrespectful. What's disrespectful is that police are operating in a way that makes citizens and communities not feel safe. At times, this is what happens. And it's even more upsetting when the president endorses that behavior. No, not okay. So,
right. And, that's basically what we're talking about here is just, in a nutshell. And it's not going to be a conversation we stop talking about either, because we can't stop talking about it. That's the whole point is, this could have ended last year with Kaepernick. It didn't, we're in a whole new time frame. Yeah. And it's still happening bigger than ever.
It's still relevant. That's what that shows.
Of course.
These issues are still relevant. And now that, what is his name?
Kirkpatrick.
Kirkpatrick has opened the door.
No, I said
no.
It's
Kaepernick. Kaepernick. I worked with this guy who's Kirkpatrick. Okay, Kaepernick. He opened the door. Now players feel less, obviously, isolation in participating in this,
right.
Which means that they wanted to, perhaps, or that
they're like, you can take me out the game too. First of all, they said they stand in solidarity with him still.
Yes.
So it's just like, you want to give him, you want to take away his seat at the table if you want to say, you can take mine away too.
Yep.
I'm going to be kneeling at every game.
Until,
you know what I mean?
This is addressed. Until our justice system and our country in general, our institutions, our political government starts to represent all of us. And it's not. We know that. We see it every day. Mm-hmm. So to be upset at the fact that someone is upset about that, not really relevant to the conversation right now. Mm-hmm. Okay? Lives are relevant. People who have to deal with this daily, that's relevant. These cases where police have overstepped their boundaries and have still not been held accountable, that is relevant. And that needs to be addressed in some way. And if we're not going to address the past, then we certainly need to change structures for the future. Right. So until you do, until the government does, I hope that there are continuous demonstrations in whatever form people see fit. Because it's important. It's important. So let's think about, I want to hear your thoughts, about how you feel about these issues. Not about kneeling, not about protests. No, how we feel about the injustices that are operating in the United States.
Right.
What do you think about that?
The bigger issue.
Do they not exist? Or are we arguing that they're not there? Because if we know that they're there, then let's talk.
What are we going to do to change
Let's address.
Yeah.
So.
All right, guys.
All right.
Well, thanks again. Please comment below and let us know what you think. And we'll have a continuous conversation about this, with all the updates. Yep. All right.
Passion and power.
Thanks.